live. It's September 25th. And today I'm here with Dr. Richard Shuster. Dr. Richard, welcome.
I am happy to be here, Marie. This is great. I have tea. I hope I'm not spoiling the theme of the show, but I do have liquid that I can consume.
No, coffee not required when you're on the show. So we have plenty of non-coffee drinkers. It's fine. It's fine. I'm addicted to coffee, but it doesn't mean that you have to be. So remind me, you're in Georgia. Am I right about that?
Atlanta, Georgia. That's correct.
Awesome. How's everything down there?
Georgia's interesting weather-wise because we do get a change of seasons, but this year it literally went from summer to fall in a day. Like one day it was 85 and it had been 85 for weeks. And then it's like somebody snapped their fingers and, now it's kind of overcast and rainy and it's more like 65, 70. So, but pleasant, we'll take that.
Nice. So you're in Atlanta, and actually just before COVID, the last trip I took was to Atlanta. So, I feel like that was years ago now, but it was in February. So
it's wild. I know. Like the last trip I took was the first week in March, and I went to Orlando, and it seems like that was another lifetime ago.
Yeah, exactly. So hopefully one day I'll be back in Atlanta, and we can meet up in person.
That would be awesome.
I'm of course in Brooklyn, New York. And if you're watching and if you're joining us later, let us know where you're tuning in from. Earlier this week, we had somebody from India. There were folks from all throughout the U.S. And as sometimes we get folks tuning in from the U.K. and stuff like that. So if you're watching, let us know where you are, say hi, and also let us know how you take your coffee. Or if you don't drink coffee, how you start your day. So, Dr. Richard, I know you have tea right now. Do you drink coffee?
I don't. And I wish that I did because I know there's such an art to coffee and the preparation of the beans and everything around it. I just have never liked it. I've tried, but so I'm
You're so lucky.
I'm a tea drinker.
You're very lucky. My drug of choice is caffeine. So good for you. And I do love tea. So what kind of tea are you drinking?
This is it's very seasonally appropriate. It's an orange spice with lavender honey. So I thought a very fall kind of thing.
Awesome. Sounds fantastic. So Dr. Richard Shuster is a licensed clinical psychologist, a TEDx speaker, CEO of Your Success Insights, a psychological assessment company, and the host of The Daily Helping, which is actually how we met.
Yep.
It's a show that's food for the brain, knowledge from experts, tools to win at life, which is regularly downloaded in over 150 countries. On his podcast, Dr. Richard's guests educate and inspire listeners through their stories, expertise, and passion for helping people make a difference in the lives of others. His mission is to make the world a better place. His show's growing movement strives to get 1 million people each day to commit acts of kindness for others and post it to their social media using #MyDailyHelping. So how are you helping people today? Tell us in the chat and use #MyDailyHelping. We'd love to hear about it. So welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely. An honor to be here, Marie. We're going to have fun.
So you have an amazing story. And I'd love for you to kind of start there and tell us where you are in your journey of life.
It's a wild question because I would have answered it very differently a couple of months ago.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people have seen my TED Talk and know that the formative transformation for me was in my early 20s when I broke my spine in a car accident and nearly died. And that really shifted me from, let me grab up all the money I can like Uncle Scrooge, to really the path that I'm on now towards being more altruistic. What's changed for me recently is that I suffered a stroke. Mm-hmm. And the backstory for this is, and if you're watching this or even if you're hearing it in a podcast, I'm a young guy. I, before the stroke, exercised 7 days a week.
Mm-hmm.
I've never done drugs. I don't drink or smoke. I was very healthy. And it still happened to me. And so it was a stunning situation that really changed my life in unexpected ways. When it actually happened, it was like 2:30 in the morning when it happened, and I found myself kind of flailing around in the bed like a fish out of water,
Wow.
like I was, and I actually turned to my wife who was sleeping, and I grabbed and yanked the pillow out from under her head
Mm-hmm.
to get her attention. And when I did, all for whatever reason that managed to come out of my mouth was, "I'm sorry," because I woke her up and she was stunned, right?
Yeah.
And so she, rolls her eyes and goes back to bed. And stupidly, I went back to bed, not realizing
Wow.
that I had had a stroke, right? So I went back to bed, and my brain is bleeding, and so that's the worst thing you could possibly do,
Yeah.
because oftentimes it's not really the stroke that kills you, it's kind of the consequence. I mean, that's how Luke Perry died. Luke Perry
Right.
had a stroke. They got him to the hospital, but then it was these consequences that destroyed him ultimately, and he was not able to recover from that. And so, fortunately for me, our COVID puppy, like so many people, our
Mm-hmm.
kid's 5-year-old vacation to Disney was canceled, so we bought a puppy instead, and we were crate training the dog, which went very poorly. So the dog had relieved himself in his crate, and it was my shift, so to speak. So I sat up, and he was barking, so I noticed, like, man, I don't quite feel right. But I also took an antihistamine the night before, just attribute it to that.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of stumbled downstairs and saw what had happened and recognized, hey, this is kind of a two-person job, because we had to get the dog and get him outside and prevent him from making the house messier than it needed to be. I guess that's the cleanest way I can describe that.
Mm-hmm.
And when I mentioned to my wife what had happened, she shot up and she's like, "You're slurring your words."
Wow.
And I'm like, "Oh." And so even then, and mind
Mm-hmm.
you, like, I'm a clinical psychologist and I've studied this stuff. I've
Right.
worked with stroke patients. It still is not it's not dawning, because from my standpoint, it's impossible, right? How could I have? It didn't even
Right.
register until we got the dog to the front, and it's 5:30 in the morning, so I went to go turn on my flashlight on my phone, and I didn't know how.
Wow.
And in that moment, it was like Bruce Willis in The Sixth Sense, when he's like, all the clues were right
Yeah.
in front of him all along, and I was like, oh my God, I've had a stroke.
Wow.
And so now, and not only have I had a stroke, now I'm thinking back to, okay, my brain has been bleeding for hours. And so now it's a race against time. So we have to now grab the kids and get in the car and go get to the hospital. And the hospitals now are not like hospitals in February.
Right.
You go to this giant plastic tent, and somebody in a hazmat suit comes up to you. No family can come.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to do the best job you can of explaining why they should let you in the hospital. What's wrong with you?
Oh my
And
God.
so I tell them, and then the first thing they do is they stick that thing up your nose to see if you have COVID. I didn't, which is good. So then they were like, okay, now what's next? And so I tell the ER doctor that I've had a stroke. And so the big joke we always had in graduate school was that we hope we never have a stroke or a severe brain injury, because we know the answers to all the questions. And as they're asking me the questions and having me go through these exercises, touch your nose and wiggle your fingers,
Mm-hmm.
like, I knew all the answers because I've trained on all the stuff they're
Right.
doing. And so I just kind of laughed. But nonetheless, like, they do their workup and they do a CT scan, and the doctor comes back, and he's like, you didn't have a stroke. There's nothing on the CT scan, and we're sending you home. Well, no, that's not acceptable. And so I remembered in that moment something that my first mentor, Milton, had taught me. I had a sales job when I was right out of college at 23, and he said to me that when you make an offer, stop talking, because whoever talks next is the likely one to give in, right?
Right. Right. Right.
And so in that moment, I feel like I'm fighting for my life, right? And so I tell this doctor, said, no, I'm not a layperson. I'm a doctor. I've studied and worked with stroke patients, and you haven't done an MRI because CT scans only show one kind of stroke, and you're doing an MRI right now. And it was like this Wild West showdown, like,
Yeah.
like saying, I'm silent and I'm staring him right in the eyes. I'm trying to make him as uncomfortable as I can.
Wow.
And there's just dead silence in the room. And eventually, it was like 15 seconds maybe, he gave in. He's like, all right, I'll do your MRI. I don't think it'll show anything. And so they took me to do the MRI, and they don't do this for CTs because there's nothing that could really impact it. When you do an MRI, they need to make sure that you don't have metal in your body or, artificial implants, things like that, aliens, whatever, because those can really screw up the MRI. And so they have a form that, they make you check, and just a little yes or no. I couldn't fill it out. I could not. I could not put the checks on the line. So fortunately, the MRI showed the stroke. And that tech who had me do the clipboard had ran back to the ER and said, this guy cannot even fill out paperwork.
Yeah.
And so the stroke was just about a millimeter off my basal ganglia. I know this is a business show, so I'm not going to talk about neuroanatomy.
Yeah.
But I literally missed it by a hair, and probably wouldn't be able to be here talking to you right now if I had hit that. So, but it's interesting because, when you injure yourself, if you went skiing and you broke your arm, you'd say to yourself, okay, so recovery 6 to 8 weeks. I'm going to be in a cast. I'm going to voice dictate my emails, but I can still do my LinkedIn live lunches. And you pretty much in about 10 seconds can figure out how you have to modify your life to adapt, and how and when you're going to recover. But I'm sitting there and I went through like this crazy emotional flip because in prior to this, I'm like fighting for my life. Like I'm fighting because if he had discharged me and I don't get blood thinners, then, who knows what happens next.
Right.
Because that's what happens, right? They're like earthquakes. There's the aftershocks. That's what can kill you. And so in that moment, I went from, okay, like, I need to let these guys know I've had a stroke to now it's real. And now I'm starting to think about how am I going to recover? How does this impact my life? I'm sitting there, tears are streaming down my face. I have no idea if I'm ever going to be able to speak professionally again. Like I have if my livelihood is just toast, right? I mean, being on stage and speaking, will I be able to remember a speech? Do I have memory impairment? I have no earthly idea if I'm going to be able to podcast again. I mean, this is what I do for a living,
right?
And no idea if any of that's going to be possible. I want to like text people updates, but I can't use the speech to text because it's been so long, my speech is screwed up. So the voice assistant doesn't understand me,
right?
And I've got this big facial droop, and like I'm bad. I'm in bad shape, and I want to text with my thumbs. Like I did remember I can use my thumbprint to access the phone, but I couldn't hit the right keys. Like my mind knew what letters I want to type. I couldn't hit the keys. Like it took me, I think, 4 minutes to compose a text that said stroke. Like that's how just off I was. Like I just couldn't do it. And so they admit me to the hospital, and now they're starting to do all their tests, and they did the rapid test for COVID, but now they want to do a real one because COVID could have caused what I had. COVID, we now know that it causes heart problems, including stroke in young people. So that was the first thing they went after, and they ruled that out. And then they're thinking about risk factors, and they're thinking about, it could be this guy's heart, or does he have cancer? Like they're ruling out everything because it just didn't have the risk factors. And as they're ruled out one by one, the part of the story that I didn't share with you is that, and this is the part if you're an entrepreneur where it really matters, is that I started my day. You asked, how do we start our day, right? My day started like every other day for me, 5:30 a.m.
Yeah.
5:30 a.m. I start my meditating and my visualizing and my gratitude journaling and exercise, like the whole routine. And I kept working all day, stopped to have dinner with my kids and do homework and bath time and all that, but right back on the computer. That day ended at 9:30. So a 17-hour day was not unusual for me.
Mm-hmm.
And the lie that I told myself, and that so many entrepreneurs tell ourselves, is one, when we wear this like a badge of courage to everybody who's got a job. We're like, it's not really work if you love what you do, right? Like everybody says that.
Not
So
true.
that's number one.
Yeah.
Number two is that we tell ourselves, we go on these crusades with our companies. We get very romantic around the idea of, I'm doing this for my family. I'm doing this to give my wife and kids everything that they could ever want and security. And I want to leave a legacy and make the world a better place for them. And so we get very passionate around these very noble and reasonable causes as to why, as business owners, we work ourselves to death. I literally almost killed myself working too hard.
Oh, absolutely.
And so, obviously we're here. I have since fully recovered. No more facial droop, and I can text and do all the things that I used to do, and I'm very, very grateful. But when my neurologist was very clear with me, and he told me, he said, Richard, you have to radically reduce your hours because your life depends on it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that I wanted to reduce my hours. This is super fun what I do. Now, I'll certainly argue that if you hate what you do and your work is, you got to get out of your job and you're miserable, that's worse. But stress is stress. Yeah. And so I made a conscious decision that I was going to reduce my workload to 25 hours a week. That's a radical departure from the 70-ish I was putting in. And so all of a sudden, I started having this bizarre realization because I was doing it, and after the first week and then the second week, I was like, wait a minute, I'm still getting everything done that I need to, that's important. Now, how could that be? And so, I'm a scientist, so I'm curious, and I go to the literature, and I look at the research that's been done on workplace efficiency and productivity. And this is not a new idea. This has been studied, and we know from data and replicated data across numerous studies, across numerous decades, that employees can be productive at 25 hours, and in some instances more. There's a drop-off. If you take somebody out to 40 hours a week, there's a decline in performance. And why is it that we work 40 hours a week?
Yeah.
Why? Probably the same reason why pancakes are eaten at breakfast, and it's just kind of weird if you're eating them at dinner, right? Like nobody questions that,
right?
And so I then said, okay, so now I'm on this journey, and if I can work 25 hours a week, and my life has been way, way better, and I'm spending more time with my wife and kids. We're actually stopping and we're preparing quality meals, and we're having fun time together on weekends, and my wife and I are spending more time together. Like okay, like this is the way it should be. If you're an entrepreneur, you're likely already doing something that you love. Nobody starts a business that they hate, and it just doesn't make sense, right? So it's not about just loving that business. It's about having balance in your life. And the irony is, my company does that. Like my technology company has tools that help people do that. Where I kind of went off the tracks a bit is because, again, I allowed myself to believe that because what I do was so fun, that doing it for 17 hours a day wouldn't take a toll. But indeed it did. And so, I'm happy to be the cautionary tale to each and every one of you listening to this or watching this, that you can have everything that you want and grow your business in the way that it needs to be. But there will be a price to pay if you burn the candle at both ends indefinitely.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's funny because you're like, this is the message that I need to hear, certainly as an entrepreneur. And it's the message that I know that a lot of people that I'm in entrepreneurial circles with need to hear. It's that if we keep doing this, because I love what I do. I absolutely love it. it's way better than anything I ever did when I was in a traditional job, and in fact, I quit a really bad job to start a business. Right. And that's the case with many of us. Like, we love those stories, but at the same time, we need balance. We need to rest. And you're the cautionary, because it literally could have been nothing else. You were healthy, you're young, you don't drink, you don't smoke, etc. And here you are, and you're living proof.
Yeah, it's pretty wild too. I mean, because it's the people that I talk to that are entrepreneurs. There's a mindset, and I think the 10x bro culture has a lot to do with this, right? Like, we pride ourselves and
Yep.
beat our chests about, look at me, I put in 2,000 hours this week, and so there's like a bragging thing about that. Like, we get this kind of trophy,
Right.
if we put in insane hours. And I mean, Forbes has studied this. I'll never forget this. They did a qualitative research study of people in the C-suite. So these are Fortune 100 executives. And in Western society, this is the peak, right? Like, we consider these people professionally to be amongst the most successful on earth. If you've got a C-level position in like a Fortune 100 company.
Mm-hmm.
Thing was, overwhelmingly, large numbers of them were in extremely poor health.
Yeah.
Their marriages were failed. They said that they were gone before their kids woke up, and they worked at the office until after they went to bed. And their children, if they didn't resent them, they regretted the fact that their kids grew up and they weren't a part of it. And so, money's great.
Yeah.
Entrepreneurship gives you freedom of money and certainly freedom of time, which I would say is more important than money. But the hourglass moves, whether you're in front of a laptop or with your family.
Right.
And so, having that balance is critical, because you're really not going to be able to improve your life or your business if you're out of balance.
Mm-hmm. That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. And I think all of us, even if we're health conscious or whatever, we need that reminder. So I'm so glad that you're here to share your story, and I'm so sorry that happened to you. It's nobody deserves that, but thank you for being as well.
I'd like to think that it's the best thing that ever happened to me. And I actually did a talk at a virtual conference recently, and somebody in the chat said, "Don't you feel unlucky? Like you broke your back and now this." And I'm like, no, like, it could have been worse. I could have died in either scenario, or been a paraplegic or whatever.
Right.
I said, imagine, because that, the car accident reshaped the next 20 years of my life. And instead of just chasing dollars, doing something that I didn't love, but thought that it would make me rich, I spent the next 2 decades pursuing things I was passionate about.
Mm-hmm.
And that would not have happened if I didn't have my car accident. And certainly, the stroke brought balance to my life, because, anytime I could schedule that next Zoom call, I was like, okay, yep, I can do it tonight, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock. Like, I would just pile those on.
Mm-hmm.
I shut my laptop at 4 every day.
It's
over. It's over. And we have this mindset too as entrepreneurs, and it's a bit of a scarcity mindset. I think that particularly early on in that journey, that a client will send us an email, and if we don't respond to it immediately, we might upset them or we might lose them. You're not. Nothing's in a vacuum, right? Like, if Oprah Winfrey emailed me at 9 o'clock at night and she said, "Richard, I want to have you on the show tomorrow," I would respond to that show.
I'm glad to hear that.
But it's Oprah, if you're watching this, feel free. But no, in seriousness, you're not getting emailed by a client, in all likelihood, who is going to transform your life in an unimaginable way. And that's kind of the metric that I would use. Nobody in their right mind who sends an email at 9, 10 o'clock at night is going to be upset if you respond the next morning.
Right.
It just won't, right? And, but we often think, oh, if I don't send this email out, what are they going to think? Or, I just send out a few more marketing blasts on LinkedIn or whatever we do. It's almost like an addiction, and it's driven by fear. It's always driven by fear. It's always driven by potential loss of a prospective client or current client.
Well, I will say that, right? If they are sending you the email at 9, 10 o'clock at night or 1 in the morning or whenever it is, and they expect to hear back from you, then they're not they're not somebody you should be working with anyway, because nothing is worth your sanity.
Correct. And there's a lot of ways to deal with that. It's kind of a weird conversation to start off a relationship with a client, and particularly in 2020, where really nobody's doing brick and mortar stuff anyway, especially post-COVID,
right?
To say, by the way, these are my hours, blah, blah, blah. A much better way of doing that is having a time-based autoresponder that you can have. Just say, hey, your email is really important to me. I'm catching my Z's so that I can be sharp and focused and bright, the next morning, and, make it fun, but you can set parameters around that. And then you don't have to deal with that, because, that's plus true to your point. Like if you establish that's the boundary, and this is what we're seeing in the corporate space. We've always known that, this is not a surprise. In Atlanta in particular, people have been doing telework for years, just because the city was so poorly designed that traffic is just unimaginably better used to be when people drove. So telework was kind of a thing. So what the data suggested was that employees actually worked more hours with teleworking than they would if they were in an office, because you take down the boundary of the workplace. But I think it's important, particularly if it's your own company, to set those boundaries, because what happens is if you respond to an email at 9, that client thinks it's okay to email you whenever, any day, any night. And if you responded to it once, but you didn't respond to it again, well, what's up with that, right? Because you've set the expectation.
Right.
And any time that you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else.
Right.
That no may be spending time with your loved one. That no may be another really exciting project that could bring you lots of revenue and that excites you. So, excuse me, boundaries are so important. It's just it's good for your sanity, and not just with work, with everything. Be able to draw lines in the sand and say, okay, this is my time for exercise. This is my time for X. This is my time. And it's not selfish. It's actually the opposite of selfish, because when you protect your time, you're protecting your health and your wellness, which means there's more of you to give to the people you care about. And that version of you that's there has more in the tank than otherwise.
Right. And also, it helps you serve your clients better. It helps you do a better business. I mean, I know when because I'm guilty of it, and we all are at some point in our lives when we're building our business, I'm guilty of answering the emails at 11 o'clock at night or whatever. I'm not my best self the next morning. In fact, I wake up stressed. I wake up angry. I wake up exhausted, and then I carry that with me the whole next day.
Right. No, I also should say you do you, right? Like if you, depending on what kind of business you have, if you see your first patient, if you see your first client at 12 p.m.,
right.
but you work till midnight, that's cool, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, that's you. But yeah, I mean, generally, if you're doing something that's going to disrupt your sleep schedule, and I mean, there's a ton of science around that too. I mean, even looking at a screen, and I know that all of the devices now have that blue light filter, and that helps, but you're still engaging your brain in cognitive activities that are telling it, hey, I need to be engaged in doing stuff, rather than at 11 o'clock at night. For most people, you're either asleep and or you you should be in that mode of kind of unwinding your mind, because you'll have more restful sleep that way.
Right. That's really great advice. And, you know, you've lived it, you know, so, I'm keen to take your story and, you know, use it to make my hours better, because my goodness, don't we all need a little bit of this? And, you know, it's funny, this happened kind of at an interesting time, because we're all guilty of having Zoom burnout, right? Zoom fatigue is a real thing, you know. And I know for me, when I first started COVID, and when COVID first hit, to me, it was like this big mission for me to keep my business alive and save it, and, you know, new offerings every 5 minutes, and this, that, and the other thing. And I found that I was on like 24 hours of Zoom calls a week.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so, and it's exactly what you're talking about.
COVID has added a tremendously complex layer to all of this, because even if you take out everything but the work,
Mm-hmm.
we are struggling with this idea of, how do we get our customers, our vendors, our employees, how do we maintain some semblance of what we had, continue to adapt our products to fit this new world, which is not going away. You know, anybody who tells you that it's going to be back to normal anytime soon is crazy.
Right.
And then you add this other factor, which impacts a ton of us, in that, oh, by the way, in the other room, you have 2 children or so
Yes.
on tablets, and now, you know, you've got to be their teacher too. And so, you know, the research on telework didn't really account for that when it was conducted, because, you know, we haven't had anything like this as a society since 1918, and
Mm-hmm.
you know, there really weren't computers in 1918. So it's very interesting, and I'm doing research around that myself right now. But what is happening is that you now likely have to be business owner.
Mm-hmm.
You're also teacher. You have to find a way to try and keep your kids from interfering. It was really funny. On my podcast, I interviewed a while ago Jack Canfield.
Mm-hmm.
And literally during the interview with Jack, my son, he's 7,
Mm-hmm.
and, you know, had a really slow, understandable talk with him about, okay, Daddy's going to go talk to somebody on his podcast,
Mm-hmm.
and you can only come in if it's an emergency, because he had a break, like whatever they did for Jim, he was like on a break. And it's not like, you know, I mean, my wife was in the house too. It wasn't like the kids are doing whatever they want, throwing
Right.
knives and whatever. But, you know, I think she was on a Zoom call too in another room. And so I'm doing my thing, and my son comes in and he interrupts the conversation. And Jack's just kind of chuckling. And he said, I said, okay, so is this really important? Yes, Daddy, it's an emergency. Okay, what is it? And then he goes, did you know that the wand that Voldemort had? And I just like, I just stopped him right there. I said, okay. So I kind of, and Jack is laughing, and I just re-explained, you know, what constitutes an emergency. And I guess in his mind, because I think he was watching Harry Potter, obviously, that was really important. But, and I think that we're kind of more accepting of that.
Yeah.
As a society, you know, like it's funny. Like, I remember before COVID, I would always see people getting dressed up in suits and ties on Zoom calls. Nobody
Yeah.
cares
Yep.
anymore. It's you just
Yep.
roll out of bed, and put on whatever and do whatever. But again, like there's now this other piece of the family that we really can't tease out, right? The lines are very blurred in terms of how you have to spend your time during the day. So that's a challenge too, particularly if they're really young. At least
Yeah.
mine are kind of old enough to where they can, you know, to a reasonable degree be independent, at least
Right.
long enough for me to hop on something like this, right?
Right.
Um, but it's a whole other challenge. And
Yeah.
so and then on top of that, we have the fact that we are socially isolated, even though we're doing stuff like this and we're seeing people wherever they are. I mean, we're across the country and we're doing this, but
Mhm.
we're starved for that human interaction,
Oh,
and we're
absolutely.
stressed, and so now more than ever, again, balance.
Mhm.
Balance is so critical. And whatever the weakest point of you is, it's kind of like your car, right? Like, what does it matter if you rotate your tires if you never change your oil?
Yeah.
And that's about the extent of my automotive knowledge. But the analogy fits, right? So
Right.
it's the same thing, right? Like you can meditate all day long, but if you're not sleeping or you're eating garbage, you know, there's a weak link. And whatever that weak link is, that is going to keep you from leveling up your business in the best way and your life.
Mhm. It's really, really important stuff. So talk to me a little bit about your business, because I know you have a relatively new company, and you're doing some amazing stuff with that. So tell us a little bit about
Yeah,
that.
thank you. So we've been doing this for 2 years. We've rebranded, and we're on version 2.0 of our software, which is really cool. One of the things that happened for me as a psychologist was that I'm intimately familiar with the world of assessments. I've seen them all in the industrial organizational settings. I've
Sure.
seen them all in a clinical setting. I was trained on them. I've worked with them. And I've had a general disdain from the assessment industry as soon as I was introduced to it.
Mm,
It's a $7 billion a year industry, largely controlled by two people
wow.
that are, two companies, not two people. It seems like there's an evil man who's controlling the assessment industry. But these companies, in my opinion, are very greedy.
Hmm.
They create tools that are largely pejorative in nature. They lack inclusivity. They're not accessible. They're cost prohibitive. You need to hire somebody like me, $5,000, to make sense of them for you. And so,
Hmm.
as my podcast continued to grow, and enough people started telling me that I'm an influencer that didn't know each other and had no agenda in saying this to me,
Right.
I accepted that must be true. And so, if I have a platform, what can I do to address things that aggravate me about society? And that was one of them that I could do something about. And so we created Your Success Insights and built on the pillars that we were going to create assessments that helped people not only identify their challenges and obstacles to give them a path through that, but help them understand what's great. And you have to have that balance. Like if everybody's got strengths, but if that's all you know, you're not going to improve. You could be a wonderful person, but if you jump out of an airplane without a parachute, and you have a problem, right? Now that's an
Right.
extreme and
Right. Mhm.
cartoonish analogy, but certainly that's an issue. So I wanted all my assessments to be able to have that yin and yang kind of piece to them. Number two, I wanted them to be very inclusive, and I wanted them to be accessible by everybody. Our most expensive offering is $50, and that's
Mhm.
by design. Nothing will ever cost more than that.
Mhm.
I wanted them to be self-scoring and self-interpreting using really cool algorithms so that you didn't need to hire a consultant to make sense of this for you, which is really cool. And number four, I wanted to reward people financially that helped me help others. And so the the verticals that we went after were interesting. And we're doing things in trauma with first responders and substance abuse and addiction. But our sweet spots are really peak performance, and that's in the corporate world That's for small business owners and entrepreneurs, and that's for athletics. And we have these tools that will help you find balance in your life. The tagline for Powers, and that's our flagship tool, is that Powers puts the balance in work-life balance, because you can't improve yourself. You can't be a better father or mother. You can't be a better spouse. You can't be a better business owner if you don't have a handle on how to bring balance into your life. And so that's what we do, and it's all based on empirical research and algorithms, and it's really cool. The first version, while it was really good, the feedback we got from it was, you're a lunatic if you think anybody's going to sit here and spend 30 minutes completing 400 or so questions. And was quite true. And so for this version for the version 2, we've used what's called adaptive logic. And so it's the same number of potential questions, but each time you answer one question, by nature of your response, it will adapt and eliminate a whole bunch of other ones. And so now, whether you're on your phone or on your computer, this is something that takes about 5 minutes to complete. And then the algorithm will create a custom PDF for you that tells you your top strengths, your obstacles right now, your most pressing obstacles, and then everything's in a really beautiful summary. And if you want to stop there, cool. If you're like me and you just love data and want to know everything about yourself, there's 34 pages of custom information that tells everything really about you and how those traits, that are 21 traits we tap that are empirically associated with success in life, impact you as an entrepreneur, impact you as a parent. And I'm really excited about what's coming next, because I kind of had the idea for this in the hospital. When I was lying in that hospital bed and I was thinking about COVID, and I was thinking about change and why do people make change and why do people not? So if you take two people and you identify that there are two people that don't eat right, let's use that analogy. Person A might have a wake-up call. Maybe, they go to their doctor and their cholesterol is way too high, or, maybe they had something like what happened to me, or whatever it is. And person A is going to take a garbage bag and throw out all of the processed and fast food and all the crap in their house, and then go to Whole Foods and just buy a ton of vegetables, and that they'll do it and they'll stick with it. Person B wants to do that, but person B still gets into the same habits, will, microwave the same whatever they were going to eat before, will order a pizza from Domino's, we'll still stay in that mind. And it's accountability. And so I recognize in a COVID world, especially business owners where money is tough, money is tight, every penny counts, not everybody is going to be able to afford an accountability coach. And so when I got well, I went to my team, very excited. I was very animated about this. I said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to create an algorithm-based AI accountability partner that's app-driven, and it's going to take their power scores as their baseline, and it's going to reward them. And I was like on a roll. And they were all horrified. And I was like, oh, by the way, we're only going to charge $8 a month for it. Everyone's going crazy. And we're doing it. So the elves are at work. So that's probably going to be ready in Q4. But it's really cool. We've gamified it so that if if your goal is to be healthier, and let's say you set a goal that, okay, I'm going to drink 8 glasses of water a day, and you do this and input that on your phone, you're going to get points each time you achieve that goal. And we have real life corporate partners. I won't say who, but we just signed 2 and they're big. You'll know who they are. And so you'll actually be able to convert your points you earn through the app into credit you can spend at their actual store. Yeah. On health and wellness stuff. And it's really, really cool. And the points, if you're doing what you're supposed to be doing and achieving your goals, the points will be worth more than what you're actually paying for the app each month. So then the Powers now, which by itself is amazing, but this is now like a chocolate and peanut butter kind of thing. They're great by themselves, but together, it's a glorious peanut butter cup of self-improvement. And so very, very excited about that. And we're launching that piece of it in Q4. So we've been hard at work on that.
That's awesome. So how can we sign up?
Okay, so there's a couple things. One, I want to do something cool for you guys. So if anybody's listening to this, and spoiler alert, Maria and I talked about this before. So anybody who goes to seekyourpowers.com, that's seekyourpowers.com,
Mm-hmm.
and buys the powers and uses the code LUNCH, we are going to do two things. One, we're going to donate a percentage of that to the ACLU, which is super cool. And two, anybody who signs up when we launch the AI Accountability Coach, we're going to give you 3 months of that for free when you sign up for it. And again, it's going to be $7.99 a month. So we're talking about a super tall latte, venti, whatever your coffee drinkers drink. So it's gonna be very affordable. And I will also say, if what I talked about with the reduced hours work week does resonate with you, we are in the process of finding companies and small businesses and entrepreneurs who wish to join in on that research to see how productive you can be working a 25-hour work week. And feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn because I believe that we can be so much better as a society if everybody's happier, if everybody's, think about what your life could be like if you added 15 hours back to it.
Yeah. Agreed.
How much healthier could you be? How much more time could you spend pursuing the things that you love? So very, very excited about all of the things that we're doing right now and ways that we can add value to people, in that work-life balance space and in the corporate space as well.
Love it. That's awesome. So Dr. Richard, thank you so much for joining me today.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. And thank you for the code for our listeners here. So seekyourpowers.com, and the code is LUNCH because it is lunchtime. And so thank you again for being here.
Absolutely. It was my pleasure. Had a great time.